This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Today's laundry and research turned up a wonderful post from someone on YouTube named Liana, who had stated, just turn the goddamn Zodiac case over to the FBI already so it can be solved. Now, of course, that came on the video of Dennis Kaufman's documentary, and I thought maybe they had not paid attention to the fact that it had been turned over to the FBI, and I responded accordingly, asking them to watch the podcast, and it actually turned out that what she meant, she says, I meant that the police should hand over all the evidence related to the Zodiac case over to the FBI if they haven't done that already, and let the FBI investigate it. Now, we did hear Chris Hawkins in previous audios indicate that technically speaking, they do have jurisdiction because he is a serial killer. They also have jurisdiction because it crosses state lines, and that automatically makes it in the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And based on my presentation and what I've put together, what they should be looking at definitely crosses those state lines. And I think that she is very right. I think that it really does need to be in the FBI's hands, and that means everybody's evidence from SFPD, Sonoma County, all of them, the serial killing sprees that are listed in this particular presentation should at least be looked at or considered and evidence provided to them. Dennis, and I didn't mention last when we were talking about Dennis's story, he did take me to see Terrence Pascal, but he had also visited Terrence Pascal and asked him to do a handwriting examination on Jack because he had worked the Zodiac cases. And Terrence told Dennis that there was an 85% match. I've not heard of using percentages in the document examination industry. In fact, one of my mentors had been slammed pretty hard in the media for giving a percentage in the John Benet Ramsey case. So we steer away from percentages. It really either is or really isn't somebody else. And typically speaking, the only reason for an inconclusive is that you did not have enough evidence, or maybe the quality of what you're looking at doesn't allow you to determine what the actual flow of the stroke is and the direction of the stroke. I've had one case like that. It was a 20-year-old DMV copy that was on the worst type of copy machine you could ever have imagined. Everything was blackened out pretty much on it, including the signature. So I had to render an inconclusive. But just so you know, now we're going to get into Dennis making contact with me. So basically my background on this particular on the Zodiac Killer case was extremely limited. In 2001, when the anthrax mailings occurred, I was listening to people make statements in regards to it being the Zodiac's handwriting. I thought they were absolutely ridiculous. I remember laughing it off, thinking that guy's a 30-year-old serial killer. He is not the mailer of anthrax. And then, of course, in 2007, Jake Gyllenhaal played the new version of the Zodiac Killer movie. I watched it, came to the end, saw that they had no ending result, but really kind of just spoke out the side of my neck when I said, if I was on that case, I could have solved it. Completely as a joke, obviously, and I hadn't even become a document examiner until 2009, so I had no reason to really believe that I could have solved it. But based on everything that you hear over the internet and everything else, everybody wants to blame the police, that they were inept. So, of course, that's probably where that particular statement in my head came from, is thinking, again, along those lines, what we've been been told. After studying this case, I do not find that the police were inept, maybe ill-prepared, maybe untrained. And of course, I believe that there was a force well beyond their means that was going to prevent this man from ever being caught. So when it really breaks it, when you really break the entire thing down, the police did everything that they could. And up until the point where we see the 2000 era take over, and of course we see SFPD dragging their feet and no longer wanting to investigate, or investigating the wrong person in order to sensationalize and monetize on another, mass media story, which we'll talk about in my story. So at any rate, in 2007, I began document examination school under Bart Baggett. Bart was an author, graphologist, document examiner with a marketing degree, and appearances on shows such as Larry King, America's Most Wanted with John Walsh, and a consultant for Texas Walker with Chuck Norris. So he was very Hollyweird vested, and I did not know that at that particular point in time. I knew of a few things. I knew he'd written some books. But I did not know how much he had actually participated in the media. Bart moves to California after telling me that I was the only person in the school that was in California, which meant I had the entire area to myself. No, I'm not greedy. I don't need all of California, but it didn't take long for him to actually move here. In fact, it was shortly after a case I had in approximately 2008. I had handled an examination, or basically did a preliminary look at some handwriting for a client at their home. And after viewing the few documents that they had showed me, I like to err on the side of, if I've already seen that it is a match or it isn't a match and it's contrary to what the person believes, I will attempt to save them some money. So I told those clients that I believed that it was extremely similar, and that it was a likelihood that we could get all the way over to South Carolina and into court, and they could show me that this one letter had happened this way and in other handwriting samples that were validated, and then that would erase our entire case. But just because their dad had written that one particular letter in his name, different from what they had remembered, that did not constitute a forgery. So of course, after telling them this, they still wanted me to do the exam. I gave my opinion to Bart. Bart came back with his opinion, which said it was a forgery. Now, of course, at that particular point in time, I was an apprentice, just like I am with Dennis when I entered this case. And I have to pay 50 to 25% of my fees that I am earning on these cases to Bart. So, of course, when he tells me that it is a forgery and that I should proceed on into trial in South Carolina, I do so. We get there. I get more validated documents from the opposing side, and I find out that it is, in fact, this man's signature, just as I believed. Now, I had to recuse myself from that case, and I found myself crying on the front porch of the steps of the courthouse, feeling betrayed, feeling let down. I know my clients were probably extremely upset because it cost them thousands of dollars to get me there, to pay me to be there. And the end result was I could not testify. And it is a likelihood that in that particular case, justice was not being served. The judge found that our side is the most honest side he had seen. He appreciated the fact that I recused myself and overturned my own opinion. However, that did not make me feel any better for my clients being put out. I didn't know that the Zodiac case was the purpose for his move, but it became apparent after I was introduced to Dennis. In January of 29, Dennis contacted me. He was in the hospital at the time, recovering from something to do with his diabetes. He indicated he was going to send me his dad's handwriting, but he couldn't afford to pay for the examination. Now, of course, there was a little bit of excitement behind the fact that he was asking me to do a comparison with the Zodiac. However, I had no handwriting to work with, and I didn't know what I could count on. So I called Bart. I asked for letters, not knowing at that particular time he had actually been on America's Most Wanted with John Walsh and worked with Tom Voigt in regards to the Zodiac Killer case. He says that in our conversation, he asked me what it was that Jack did. I explained to him that Jack was a security guard. He said Jack wasn't smart enough. He told me to take the case on for entertainment purposes since I couldn't receive payment for it. Don't hold too much into it because he's working with a girl who writes like the Zodiac and claims her father drove her around while he killed, and she wrote the Melvin Belli letter at the age of 7 while being in possession of Paul Stein's glasses, keys, and the Zodiac Killer hood. These were the claims she made. He's working on a book and a documentary with this individual because she shows the genetic predisposition to write like the Zodiac. Now, first and foremost, when I tracked back her age, she would have been 7 years old at the time this letter for Melvin Belli had been written. And while copybook might appear as a childlike writing because that's where they start, that's what they learn, they are not excellent at it at the age of 7. That's the beginning age for learning to write. And quite frankly, she would never have been able to have executed this particular letter as nicely as it was done, as disguised and perfect copybook that it was. So whether or not as an adult she can achieve this type of look, which I have noted that there have been examiners out there that have actually sat with clients they wanted to prove could or couldn't write in particular ways. And for hours, they said, taking samples, you don't take samples in hours, you take samples in minutes. In hours, you teach somebody how to write a sample. So I'm not sure to what degree they worked on this with her, but clearly we're going to get into the Deborah Perez thing here shortly, but this was more or less about what I was told on the phone by Bart. So this is also the letter Bart decided to give me. So if in fact he asked me to make a comparison of a known Zodiac letter to the suspect, Jack Terrence, in which the case was, then why would he send me a letter that he honestly believed, was written by Deborah Perez and not by the Zodiac? So there's question number 1. Question number 2, why did he send me a document that was so highly disguised as my first sample to work with? Either way, this letter sent to Belli, so named because it was written to high-profile attorney Melvin Belli, representing one of the U.S.'s biggest criminals, Jack Ruby, in the mob, in the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, and he took that case on for free. It says in Wikipedia, in his best-known case, Belli represented Jack Ruby for free after Ruby shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. Belli attempted to prove that Ruby was legally insane and had a history of mental illness in his family. That's a stretch. Running one of the biggest mob syndicates there are. Insane. Okay. On Saturday, March 14th, 1964, Ruby was convicted of murder with malice and received a death sentence. Immediately thereafter, Ruby and his siblings fired Belli, as they also hired and fired several other lawyers during the case. In late 1966, Ruby's conviction was overturned with help from other defense lawyers on the grounds that he did not receive a fair trial. A retrial was scheduled outside of Dallas, but Ruby died of cancer before it could take place. I can't imagine anybody overturning anything, but here's to the justice system. If he didn't get his rights, then of course he was due another trial. It did say at this point in time that Belli became very critical of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Now, I wonder if that's because that was who was responsible for pardoning him. I have no idea, but why and how J. Edgar Hoover comes up on Belli's wondering list, because he comes up on mine a lot, especially when we see that the suspect in these cases is making references or making analogies and connections to Hoover and the FBI. So this letter was sent to me as an 8.5 by 11, which made the overall handwriting appear larger than most people write. But it was obvious that copybook print was used, and this is the general go-to for people who are trying to disguise their writing. So I had no reason to believe that writing a little bit bigger would not have also been one of the employed methods of disguise. I had this for the Zodiac's writing, and eventually Dennis did send me 5 different samples of Jack's writing. I let it sit on my desk for 2 months. I had just gone back to college for a degree in legal assisting while completing my last 7 months as an apprentice of document examination. In March of 2009, I finally picked up the handwriting, and with one of the Zodiac letters and 5 communications from Jack, I had discovered 20 significant handwriting traits and identifying characteristics of Jack's in the Belli letter. I was up until 4 in the morning, scouring over it. I was almost addicted at that point. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and the actual matches were just blowing me away. So I asked for more samples of the Zodiac writing, and Dennis gave me more of that and more of Jack's writing. At the time, I was an apprentice, like I said, with a contract that required if I took a job for this period, I must submit my work to my mentor for approval before releasing an opinion and pay him 50 to 25% of my contracted price. In accordance, Bart called me to discuss my findings. After I'd submitted just the basic view, he claimed that they couldn't be the same author because the handwriting on the Belli letter was so much bigger than Jack's. The Belli letter again was also altered. The pixel width had been enlarged 1,000 by 1,000. Pixel width and height, 1,000 by 1,000, which presented it as a 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. I argued that the points were still there. So the characteristics are still there no matter the size of the writing, which I'm not sure if I should have argued that, especially with my mentor, but I did choose to engage that argument. And I had asked him, I was actually thinking he had studied my work before he called me, which is what he's supposed to do in each of my cases. And it was apparent that he hadn't. I was told that I was in over my head. To me, I was literally almost crushed. I'm 7 months away from graduating. I'm already appearing in trials. I could have an effect on people's livelihoods, their financial statuses, family law with children, criminal court with their liberties and freedoms. There were so many things that I could affect. So I was a little disheartened, and I asked him what he meant by that. And he said, no, you're a good document examiner. So that led my mind obviously over into its own little avenue of what could he have possibly meant that I was in over my head about. After doing the study and the research on this case, I can clearly see what he was talking about now, and we'll get into how that played out. But the following Saturday, from the phone call with Bart, I received another phone call from Robert Beyer, who was a teacher at Bart's handwriting school while I was at one of my college classes for the legal degree. I stepped out and I took the call because it was odd that this man would call me because we never have any communications outside of class. And Bob indicated that Bart asked him to call me because I was looking for a second opinion. I never asked for that. I never said I wanted a second opinion. So for him to say that Bart said I wanted one, obviously indicates that there's already some mistruths occurring. But he proceeded to tell me that I was wrong about my opinion. And after arguing for several minutes with him about the differences and the similarities, it became apparent as well that he had not looked at my work. So I asked him, did you even look at what I sent, or did Bart send you my work? He said, yeah, he sent it, but I couldn't open it up. So number 2, teacher mentor telling me that I'm wrong when they haven't even opened my work. So how can you discuss? I mean, this is no more than Tom Voigt or his crew or anybody else out there bashing me for what type of education I have, where I come from, who I am, instead of actually attacking the handwriting. If they had a valid case that the evidence didn't support what I was saying, they could then just point it out and prove it, because I've blasted these presentations all over the internet, including on my message board, where everybody could see the work that I'd done. And not one person has come to me to say you're wrong because of this in your work. So it took me 5 to 6 years actually to find out that Bart had never opened my work. It took quite some time. So I did not know that at the time. I was under the impression he had and couldn't understand why he was not picking apart the work like we had done on all the cases that I had done in the apprenticeship. So Dennis actually called on me for my opinion, and I told him what I'd found, but that my mentor had said about the size of the middle zone writing. And Dennis indicated that the size of the letters were actually about 5 by 7 and that he could prove it. He also gave me a 1986 letter about 2 Sacramento murders a couple weeks previous to the letter being sent that the police had never shown the public. It claimed minus 100 plus, and I'm going to assume this is victims, though people can vary on the theory of what this count means. For me, it's a count of deaths, especially when, or a count of victims, especially when he hops up to number 7 and there is in fact number 7 people that have been injured or killed. Dennis, I told him that I actually needed proof of this, because if I was going to go against what my mentor said and release this opinion on CBS 13 News, I needed to validate some of these concerns. So Dennis took me to Terrence Pascoe's house. We spent a little bit of time there. He was one of the original Department of Justice document examiners on the Zodiac Killer case, and he happened to be here in Sacramento, which was perfect. Mr. Pascal confirmed the size of the letters being approximately 5 by 7 sheets of paper, and confirmed the 1986 letter as being an authentic Zodiac letter that had never been released to the public. So when I got home that night, I proceeded to go ahead and scan in the document from the Zodiac writing, that Melvin Belli letter, because now I needed to plot this out on paper, not just take mental notes or point to with a pen in that. I wanted to break it apart and show these individually, letter for letter. When I did that, the scan had re-imaged its size from the 8.5 and 11 that I was holding in my hand and laid on that scanner, actually spit out in a Word document to be the approximate size of a 5 by 7 when I printed it out. And I was astonished. I near fell out of my chair. I had goosebumps all over my body, because had I known that that had been the result of actually scanning that back in through the process where it reads the dots per inch, I probably wouldn't have needed to go to Terrence Pascal, because the computer did it for me. Either way, I took control of, So even the attempt to widen and heighten the pixels had failed, because it still read in real form when re-imaged digitally back into the computer system. During this time, I was paying as much as $1,000 a month to Bart in fees on cases that I was taking that he claimed was for advertising. I at this point in time, took control of my website by transferring it to my new IT guy. And I say new, but he's now old, because he's been with me since 2009, who would eventually build my new website. My passwords to my website, my domain did not work for me or him for some reason. It actually required me recontacting Bart and attempting to get access to the stuff I actually paid for. Now, Dennis asked me to release my opinion on CBS 13 News with Chris Pickle, and he gave me a week to decide, which really kind of put me under a lot of pressure. And quite like today, knowing that I was going against the likes of Bart Baggett and his school where I was trained, that I was physically sick to my stomach over this. There were 3 or 4 phone calls with Bart during this period over, don't release it, it's not this, it's not that. But the next phone call is the one that really kind of struck me as odd. I explained that Dennis wanted me to release my opinion, and Bart indicated that if I did, I could be kicked out of the school or forfeit my fees paid for my tuition, or there could be repercussions within the school. Again, making me physically sick. I was sick for an entire week, but I knew I had to tell the truth. I had to at least show the world what it was that Dennis was dealing with. And I didn't want to lose, but I also at the same time didn't want to lose what I'd been working for. I'm literally months away from graduating from the school. Then at some point, right before I was ready to release the identification of Jack Terrence, I received a call from Bart, and he said that since Dennis didn't pay me, it didn't fit the contract, and he couldn't stop me from releasing my opinion, as it did not conform to the contract we had, because I didn't receive anything monetary. All right, so one thing off the list didn't mean I wasn't still going against him in the school, just meant that I wasn't going to receive any, I thought wasn't going to receive any repercussions at that time. In March of 2009, I released the opinion on CBS 13 News, and it was followed by a Bigfoot news story about a retired SFPD officer finding a Bigfoot in a freezer somewhere out in Montana or something like that. Either way, absolutely ridiculous. And it made that segment look ridiculous. More interesting is that at a later date, when I backdoored Tom Voigt's website and obtained images off of it, I found the actual Bigfoot image that was used in that news story on Tom Voigt's site. So whether he copied and pasted it or he provided it, now remember, by 2005, all references to the Zodiac is being forwarded to Tom Voigt. He is the person handling the news. He is the person answering questions. He's the person that's doing the press information for the Zodiac case. So either he provided that Bigfoot or he decided he'd like a copy of it to probably joke on Dennis about how that occurred. Either way, I'm sure that there was something to do with him and the involvement of the playing of that segment following the release. 30 days to that date, I released my opinion on CBS 13 News. Deborah Perez stood on the steps of the Chronicle with her publicity rep, former Bell Live partner Kevin McLean, who had been disbarred, just like another former partner, F. Lee Bailey, claiming that she was the real deal. Bart had backed her on his website by saying she showed a genetic predisposition to write like the Zodiac Killer, who was her father. I thought this must be his documentary and book deal that he moved to California for. So now things started to make sense. Whereas when I started months earlier, he was not going to be in the California area. I was the only person that had it to him moving himself and his administration into California. And now I was competing for business with him in California. The next few months seemed to be kind of a lag in incoming cases after I released this opinion. Bart also handled my Google AdWords advertising, which I paid for on top of paying him to advertise. So literally, I was probably more or less likely paying for nothing because all of the advertising that he did was fairly stagnant. Once he created it, it was done, out the door, but I continued to pay for it for months on end. And then, of course, I discussed the fact with him that many of his students or members were probably paying far less than I was, and we ended up settling on a monthly fee of $350, which kind of temporarily made me a little happy. I was saving anywhere from probably $500 to $700 a month doing it that way. And then, of course, I was still paying for my own AdWords account on the outside, but he was managing. So after that, there had been times when the business was slow and I would go to AdWords to see what was going on and see that they had either been turned off or disabled without any explanation. I obviously was not the person in there doing that. I was not manipulating them, nor did I probably even know how at that point, which is probably what kicked me into trying to handle some of my own AdWords advertising. I did eventually take over all my advertising accounts and business seemed to pick up at that point. But then there were times that I wouldn't take a job for months. But I would be paying excessive AdWords fees. So I would be paying $750 to $1,000 per month again with no explanation. So I decided to go to Google and I Googled Document Examiner and I seen that several students and members and Bart himself were advertising in the Northern California area where they were not located and undercutting my fees by $200 per case. Now it became extremely apparent what was going on. Why would he be advertising in my area? Basically because I was no longer a member of HSI and paying him to advertise me. Somehow this must have opened some door that would allow him then to cross that line or boundary that was kind of an unsaid boundary, but we just don't advertise in other people's areas. One, because we're supposed to be a team, and number two, because I don't like to go all the way down to Los Angeles. I want to stay here in the Sacramento area. And for somebody to pay me to go down there when Bart and his admin was down there meant that I could simply refer to them and then the client would save money not having to fly me in. So there was benefits on both sides. However, that was completely negated by Bart. So let's see here. I thought this to be unfair, but in another light, I was no longer paying to advertise with the school, but did that give him the right to move into the very area he had said was mine from the start before even moving to California was really the question in my mind. There was nothing I could do about it. It wouldn't be until 2021 that light was shed on that particular time in my business. I had found out from a valuable source that Bart had incited them and other people within his organization to create this advertising agenda against me to damage my business and employed the help from other people, which is even sicker. I mean, I typically tend to think that in the fraud business or in the document examination business, that it's very rare you find somebody participating in a fraud with someone else because most people look down upon that. Obviously, they have their own feelings about doing something wrong, but then asking somebody else to do that wrong with them kind of steps over a line. However, that was not some concern of Bart's. He was clearly able to go and ask people to do this, and they were willing to do and did do and received business, where I nearly went under during a couple of these incidences. Now, another case that I handled against Bart in 2018 almost cost my client large sums of money in a tenant landlord case, where Bart wrote an opinion in favor of the opposing party but did not show up to testify. I was there, and I got a little scared when the other opposing side decided to pop up with they had an opinion letter from my mentor from the very school I went to, and that he would know more and be better and had studied longer and had done more than I possibly could have, and that the court should accept his opinion. Thankfully for me, the court declined to accept that opinion because Bart did not appear, and of course, we ended up winning the case. I ended up with a copy of Bart's report, in which case the exemplars of my client's signature that was used to form the opinion literally contained the cut and paste forgery that was used to create the leases. So I contacted Bart. I asked him about it. I kind of jammed him up a little bit. I was extremely upset that he was going to cost my client justice and monetary means based on his opinion of it being an authentic signature, when in fact he had the cut and paste forgery inside those exemplars. His excuse was it was a rush job. He was in a hurry. I don't find any reason for that. I cannot imagine ever telling a client I was wrong because I rushed. Every case deserves its time, proper examination, and so forth, and it should never be about money. So taking in money and then claiming that you had to rush to do it is no excuse. I can see the repercussions that may come from me sharing this live for everyone to see, but it is the truth, and we'll see what happens. I see that Bart still advertises himself and his father nationwide already, so hopefully people understand that bringing him in to testify in states that he does not live in can be very expensive, and his opinion may or may not be correct, but he will collect your money. Now, those who can't or shouldn't teach, this is where his strengths are, because it's not in morality, ethics, or values. This brings us to the first suspect that I actually was active in the case when this suspect was brought to the light, where it was very sensationalized. While we were giving good evidence on the right suspect, this was kind of shadowing us once again like Bigfoot. So Garward Hendrickson is the actual suspect that Deborah Perez is falsely accusing with her, well, we already know all of that, and her handwriting expert on the case was Bart Baggett. Perez claims she drove around in the back seat of the car with her father, who committed the crimes, wrote the letters, except for the Melvin Belloy letter, which she wrote herself, and has Stein's eyeglasses and a Zodiac hood. Here's where Holly gets weirder. F. Lee Bailey asked for the false Zodiac suspect. Oh, I'm sorry. F. Lee Bailey was asked for by the false Zodiac suspect who called from the mental hospital, along with Melvin Belloy, to be on the Dunbar show. So is that a coincidence that we're staying in this circle? I don't think so. And Kevin McLean, Deborah Perez's publicity manager, are both disbarred attorneys who were also partners of Melvin Belloy. And actually, yeah. This is the footage that I took from Aphrodite's True Crimes on Investigation Discovery, which is an episode that Dennis and I did with her in regards to the Zodiac. She spoke both about Deborah Perez, which I thought was a joke, but then also she played the news footage from Deborah Perez and spoke about it, but then she actually interviewed and did the episode based mostly off of what Dennis and I had to say about Jack. Now, the newspaper sensationalized the crap out of this. I mean, look at these news reporters, not to mention that she's standing on the front porch of the San Francisco Chronicle. I don't know if that is something that they allow people to do, but I'm pretty sure that that would have been something that would have had to have been prearranged, since it's at the opening door. And you're going to be packing the streets, obviously, with reporters and news companies that actually send this thing worldwide. So while CBS News seemed to have gotten the information out about Jack here, at least locally. This one shot rapid fire, like we might be going to war. Everybody knew about it. And so when I go to do the release on Guy Ward Hendrickson's handwriting, this is shadowed by the death of Michael Jackson, who supposedly overdoses that same day we released the exclusion in the case in regards to Guy. Dennis didn't actually even want to do the press release after finding out that Michael Jackson had passed. He knew that this was going to shadow the information in regards to Perez, but it actually caused us to argue and maybe even further separate. But the plans were set, and Jan, who was the daughter of Guy Ward Hendrickson, really just wanted this done. She was in town from the Bay Area. She had made arrangements. She had stayed at my house. She was ready to go. She did not want to stop what was about to happen. And I want to say that we maybe had three news reporters show up for this press release. Now, Bart Baggett does not show any report for having examined Guy Ward Hendrickson's handwriting. So to make the claim that Deborah shows a predisposition to write like the Zodiac would extend to the fact that you've done an examination of Guy Ward Hendrickson's handwriting and determined he was the Zodiac. But I've never even seen that happen. It just instead says that Deborah Perez shows the propensity to write like the Zodiac Killer and wrote the Belle Isle letter. Now, his participation in this event didn't even make an identification of the suspect, let alone even properly investigate or claim that she was a biological daughter of Guy Ward Hendrickson. Baggett states that Perez shows a genetic predisposition to write like the Zodiac Killer, thus her father is the Zodiac Killer. This doesn't work like DNA, like with the Golden State Killer. I mean, come on, people. They didn't track DNA back and then back forward to, yes, we've got the right person. And this is handwriting. He informed me he was writing a book and making a documentary, which is likely why he moved to California and uprooted his then family and handwriting school to Southern California. I never did see that book or documentary, which means I probably blew up his battleship. Not my intention. Coincidental, and maybe it was time for the truth to be told. There was a reason why I came into this industry. There was a reason why I came in underneath him of all people. There was a reason why Dennis came to me in this case. So I do tend to believe that everything happens for a reason. Bart also consulted with Tom Voight in the Zodiac Killer case, including an episode of America's Most Wanted with John Walsh. Zodiac Killer wrote an AKA Scorpions letter to John Walsh in 1990-91. So again, there's an affiliation with the Zodiac communicating directly with John Walsh just before the FBI closed their files on the case. So I'm trying to find that correlation there because we know that America's Most Wanted worked with the top suspects in the FBI. So I'm tending to start to see that there's a reason maybe why the FBI hasn't demanded all of the information and taken over this case, and there's something they know that we don't. Maybe I can see the circles, but I'm hoping actually that everybody else can too. Turns out Perez was witnessed all over the internet previous to this event that she was the love child of JFK, to the admissions of being a letter writer and daughter of the Zodiac Killer. I don't know how you go between the two, but again, the circle is still fitting, you guys. We've talked about JFK. And we've talked about the Zodiac Killer making contact in regards to JFK's case. Now, even better, Perez was blaming a man who adopted her. So it wasn't even her biological father. She could never have a genetic predisposition. And her four siblings she was blaming a man who adopted her and her four siblings by marrying their mother out of Mexico and saving them from dirt floors, as told by Hendrickson's real daughter, Jan. I completed a handwriting examination of Hendrickson, which we're going to take a quick look at some of the writing. SFPD gave hundreds of hours, to my knowledge, investigating the likes of someone so fraudulent, but wouldn't speak to us or give us any answers in the way of Jack Terrence. And that's why we now call it the Zodiac Jack effect. In the end, nothing came from Perez's story, and just like the rest, she floated into oblivion, never to be heard from again. And I'm sure that the release that she was found to be fraudulent and that her her adopted father was not the Zodiac was probably a little blip in the news, maybe just an internet link to a story that has confirmed that she was not telling the truth all along. Either way, she's gone. She was here really just to stir the pot, cause confusion, disseminate information, and maybe even stop Dennis's investigation. Because as it turned out, when I mentioned Dennis's name to my mentor on the very first phone call, he was aware of who Jack Terrence was and Dennis Kaufman, and that blew my mind. Again, why would he know about them? So I'm still here waiting for Terrence's evidence to be given the same consideration and the answers to so many that we have been waiting for. This is Guy Ward Hendrickson's handwriting. Turns out that Guy wrote in cursive or all capital letters full time. He did not use lowercase printing, and we see an excellent use of lowercase printing in these letters. So based on these factors and a comparison of these letters to the actual writing, I concluded that he was not the author of any of the Zodiac communications, and therefore, obviously, and not the father of Deborah Perez. So the entire story is washed out the door. Now, since that time, I've spoken to numerous agencies and family members in hopes to get this message out. I've worked with Chris Pickle on CBS 13 News, Stephen Dewhurst, a professor from Arizona State University. In 2009, I gave handwriting presentations to Chris Hopkins and the FBI, who asked for 4 additional reports over probably the next 2 years, which included linguistics, Black Dahlia, Lipstick Killer, John Benet Ramsey, and eventually the anthrax case. Harry Phillips on 20 on 20 I've spoke with, and in 2010 we did Aphrodite Jones, True Crimes on Investigation Discovery, Zodiac Killer, with which of course we've talked about, has the news reports from Deborah Perez, interviews with Dennis Kaufman, myself, law enforcement, and quotes the FBI results on the handwriting of Jack W. Terrence Jr.'s, which says they match. Now, I had gone through some things with her to try and demonstrate some of the characteristics that I found. One of those was the letter O, which was one of the most unique features initially found in Jack's handwriting from the Belli letter, because at the very bottom of the Belli letter, these O's started to pop up. And of course, once I saw those, and I saw that Jack himself as well actually created cursive O's with inner loops inside of printed writing, made it very, very individualistic type of writing. So the O, whereby the Zodiac Killer and Jack used the cursive version with the inner loop in the middle of the printed writing, the egg-shaped form laying on its side with a flat bottom side, are further confirmation of that identification. So here we're discussing the spacing and individual identifying handwriting characteristics and traits that an author does without thinking about it. And it is so habitual and auto-programmed, it's as if they cannot stop doing it even if they wanted to. And that's why disguise usually starts out disguised and works its way. If there's any length of time that the individual is writing, they tend to start dropping their own habits because it's subconscious and they really don't think about it. So I actually gave a demonstration to Aphrodite Jones where she attempted to write the letter A. These ones here are me showing her different forms of A, and you can see where my starting area is up here as it wraps around, and my double stroke is right there in the stem. Now, she actually starts at the bottom near the baseline, wraps all the way up around, and then exits out of her letter A. So she attempted to do it again. Now, this time we see the little point, or the starting point is still at the bottom here, and then it again works its way up into the exit. By this time, she's losing it. She's absolutely cracking up because she attempts to do it 3 more times. And every single time, she again is starting from the bottom. And when she got to this one here and did this particular one, she said, well, it's on the inside. I said, but it's still there. And that's when she started busting up. Either way, this segment, Aphrodite asked me if I believe that Dennis's stepdad Jack is the Zodiac Killer, and I respond absolutely. You used to be able to find this on YouTube or on the internet. It is now part of some HBO or some other type of subscription, so you're not getting it randomly or free if you can find it. I have reached out to Aphrodite and asked her if she would get, or if I could get permission to play this documentary on Jack Terrence. Now, I also noticed she had interesting different information or composites. So as I looked at these composites, obviously this one compared to one that is what I think more exact to the original time frame, we can see again that the face has been elongated. And then when we compare it to the newspaper clippings that Dennis Kaufman had, once again, we see it's been elongated. So it seems to me that at least since 2009, they have started stretching these particular images, which is obviously skewing the evidence from the start. She also had the version of the hood that I showed everybody that showed the buckling at the top. We can see that there are, in fact, very much differences between this version and this version. However, they are fairly similar. They are still completely different in my eyes as a document examiner. But this looks to be actual evidence that she was able to snap footage of, because it even included a height line for what they believe to be the height of the perpetrator. Now, we discussed the notion that Jack's mask did not appear to have a mouth or a nose hole in one of my last laundry research. These sketches also do not depict any of these. So this is no longer going to be the difference that I spoke about when we talked about the similarities and the differences in the hood found in the PA system by Dennis Kaufman and the hood that was actually explained by Brian Hartnell, or the images that were created based on that information. Now, they have tried to make lots of people in this particular case look absolutely insane and crazy. Now, whether it be Harriet Suchet, myself, Dennis Kaufman, they've also attempted to do that with Sandy Betts. And we're going to be hearing about her more as we climb into the Zodiac stuff, because she was a personal friend and worked with Darlene Ferrin. She had her own theory and her own take on it. If I believe, or if I remember correctly, she believed that Darlene Ferrin was in with a bad group of guys who were either money laundering or making money, illegal money, of course, but they came from Chicago. Now, that was right up the alley. I thought, you said the word Chicago. How could that be? Because we know that Jack has relation and affiliation back in Chicago. We know the mob is in Chicago. There's a lot of reasons to believe that that was some true information that she might be giving, but they wanted to just completely steer away from that. And in order to do so, they had to make her look crazy. Now, during this segment, Per Aphrodite, she says, according to the FBI and what they are telling us, that indeed they do match Jack Terrence's writing with the samples known samples of the Zodiac. That's a direct quote. Soapbox time. Tom Voigt actually relived this statement with others on his message board, making jokes that Aphrodite said her sources at the FBI, and then it alluded to the fact that the sources were Dennis and I. First off, Dennis and I don't work for the FBI. We have never said that the FBI claimed a match. In fact, I stated they gave us a BS report that was a page and a page with a second page with a paragraph on it long that stated he may not have written the letters, giving us nothing, but they had only used something like 4 or 5 samples out of 300 in order to come to that conclusion. That said, he may have and he may not have written the Zodiac letters, aside from the fact that the words above are verbatim. So she did not say her sources. She said, according to the FBI, and that was not Dennis and I. Now, jumping back off. Way to go with twisting the truth again, Tom. With real compassion in her voice and face, Aphrodite continues to say, if in fact they are able to make that announcement conclusively, there will be justice and conclusion for the victims. And I think that Dennis Kaufman will finally be able to put his head on the pillow at night and rest, because this man has no peace. Now, in conclusion, on the outro of the show, she says, do people like Dennis Kaufman and Nanette Barto hold the key to bring about justice to families victimized by this serial killer? I do not know this answer, but it is precisely why I've paid to go live on TV and radio, to get as much exposure as possible in breaking apart the media fallacies and the individuals who are trying to keep the suppression going in this particular case so they can keep making an income. And maybe the court of public opinion will rise and demand a thorough investigation by the FBI for some real answers and closure. Either way, I've expended all efforts to bring this tragedy of news media and Voight types that continue to make money from false facts or lack of investigating. To continue on, I've got a few minutes here. In 2010, I received a letter from Sad Badge, which was the 2005 finale letter to Tim Miller of Texas EquiSearch. His daughter, Laura Miller, was killed in 1984 in the League City, Texas. We will talk about that murder. He showed up with his production manager or videographer, Steph Watts, in 2011. Tim Miller is more recognized for finding Casey Anthony's baby's body in the suitcase in Florida, and also what I refer to as the John Walsh effect, because he lost a child, I believe was probably more or less mob related based on information that he'd given to Dennis, would have put him in the middle of that mix during that time. Tim put me on the phone with the retired head of the FBI, and they couldn't find anything on this person who gave me this letter, but Tim was shocked that it showed up, because not only did he only turn it over directly to the police department in League City, but it had become missing, as well as all the other Zodiac letters by the time that we were speaking. Now, he had never seen the handwritten version of it, so I eventually had to kind of kick that, because I do not know who hand wrote that particular cut and paste letter, or at least mimicked it. There is a good chance that Jack did. This would be right up his alley to do. So sending more than one communication, but Tim has no idea where that second communication went to. Again, I just, for validity's sake, needed to actually set that to the side, but we will talk about it when we get to his case. Now, in 2010, 2011, okay, so we talked to Barry King and Catherine Broad, father and daughter of the OCC cases in 1977, and we gave linguistic exams for crimes. Knew that we did new handwriting exam completed on the secret witness letter in the Jill Robinson case as of recently, which I did identify Jack and the Zodiac. I tried reaching out to Swinney's family in Alcaloo, South Carolina, in regards to the death of Binnicker and another little girl in 1944 in South Carolina. Dolores Kennedy on behalf of Bill Hirons, also another victim of Jack's crimes in the Lipstick Killer series. Napa Sheriff's Department and Napa Police Department. They were smug, wouldn't allow me to give them the handwriting examination. Explained that the grant from the government for the cold cases would be better used where there was more evidence. I don't get it. I'm here sitting in front of them with the evidence. Mitzi Roberts of LAPD and her captain, we brought negatives to her. Some of those were not returned. We talked about that. Bill Young, a retired police detective from League City, Texas, now a private investigator for Tim Miller, came out and sat with me. He asked me to do the handwriting of Clyde Hedrick, which was the #1 suspect for Tim Miller back in the day. We've run out of time, you guys. It is 7:50. I'd hoped that we would have gotten through this. It looks like I've got approximately 2 more slides that we'll pick up on next week, just to finish out what I have done in this case. And then we are literally going to enter the Zodiac. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Take care. No!